All right, thanks, Vicki. Thank you, Cliff. Thank you, Cliff, for that opening. So yeah, I just want to begin here by thanking the board members. You can see here we do have a couple of vacant positions, and we do have a few new board members that will be joining us here in the coming weeks, coming months. But we do want to thank all the board members. You can see the wide range of organizations that represent the board on the OIPC board. So thank you all for your dedication, your time, your service. You know, it's amazing that we can gather so many folks from across such a wide range of organizations to move this initiative forward. So just want to thank the board members here today. As well, past board members who have resigned, Kristen Obeid from OMAFRA, Mahari McFarland from Nature Conservancy, Ori Urquhart, Blazing Star, and Michael Farrell from Hydro One. Your contributions over the years have been immense, and just want to thank you for your time and your dedication and effort for the OIPC board. As well, this is a snapshot, sort of a graphic of I mentioned those organizations that represent the board members. So again, just another indication of just how far and wide-reaching the whole topic of invasive species are, and hence why we have this wide range of organizations that represent our board. Strategic priorities. We've gone through a lot of changes at OIPC over the years, but the one thing that's sort of maintained sort of steadfast is our strategic priorities. We have updated the priorities over the years and tweaked them, but essentially we look to increase communication. That's the main message of OIPC, is to spread the word, not the species. So essentially, you know, through workshops, and we'll get to it a little bit more, through technical bulletins of workshops and BMPs and all these types of things. It's really about increasing the communication about the importance of the whole initiative behind invasive species management. And that leads us to grow the BMPs, the Best Management Practices program. That's something that we've, OIPC is known for, and something, you know, that we really strive to achieve, is to ensure those BMPs are out there, and so folks have the best management options for invasive plant species. And then the third strategic priority is to build on the Grow Me Instead program. That is something that has been steadfast, sort of a flagship piece for OIPC for years, and that's the Grow Me Instead program. So just to build on that program and further enhance it. Through all of these strategic priorities, you know, we look to achieve financial stability. Obviously, we can't do that without, we can't run the program and without financial stability. Working with respect to incorporate, you know, Indigenous perspectives and work towards reconciliation. That's obviously a key piece throughout our strategic priorities and all the work that we do at OIPC. And then to consider climate change. So, you know, having a climate change lens on everything that we do, the priorities, as well as all the work that we do, is extremely important for us.
Sorry about that. I couldn't seem to advance my slides anymore. I'm going to reshare.
Great, thanks, Vicki. Technology is awesome until it's not. And then staff, but mighty. The efforts that Emily and Vicki put in to make this OIPC run is incredible, And as I said, they do an absolute mountain of work for the two of them. So everybody, just want to thank Emily and Vicki for all their hard work, especially when it comes to putting on a conference like this. It's just so much work organizing everybody, as well as to the daily work of writing technical documents and technical bulletins and BMPs and things like that, and all the research that goes into it. So just huge kudos, congratulations on a well-organized workshop, and thank you for Emily and Vicki.
Thank you very much, Brandon. And with that, I wanted to provide some updates on what we've been up to for the past year, over what we accomplished in 2024. So we were able to complete 5 BMPs, one Japanese barberry with the Environment and Climate Change Canada, and then 4 BMPs, burdock, Manitoba maple, oriental bittersweet, and winged euonymus with the City of Toronto. So very excited to have those now available on our website to download, along with 27 other BMPs. And the research and completion of these documents was made possible by the financial support of Environment Climate Change Canada and the City of Toronto. We also wanted to send a special thanks to our network of experts who provided input and reviewed these documents. And excitingly, we have 2 new BMPs on the horizon with the City of Toronto, with support from the City of Toronto. It's the Tree of Heaven BMP, and there will be a special section on spotted lanternfly in that BMP, and also the periwinkle BMP. And we have throughout the year 2024, we've been updating all of our technical bulletins, and they're slowly making their way back to the website. So the first one to come on our website again is common buckthorn. So that's been updated. Japanese knotweed is still in progress and will be updated soon. And we wanted to thank the ISC for supporting the desktop publishing of these bulletins. The next few slides, I wanted to go over some projects the OIPC has been involved with through the Green Shovels in 2023, 2024. So during the last OPWG annual meeting in January 2024, we hosted a half-hour session titled First Nations Engagement, Knowledge and Perspectives, with the presentation titled Balancing Interference and Stewardship Learning from Our Relations About How We Govern Our Actions in a Changing Environment. The panelists were Kathleen Ryan, Director of Strategic Partnerships and Initiatives, and Emily Monser, Manager for the Coastal Waters Monitoring Program in Saugeen Ojibwe Nation. From this meeting, several reflections, follow-ups, and next steps were proposed. The OIPC also hosted a 2-part training session with Green Shovels partners to complement the release of the Phragmites Guidebook. This training took place on March 6th and 7th, 2024, with the goal of providing key information that goes into creating a Phragmites management plan. This 2-day event features experts in the field of Phragmites management, and we had over 80 people attend the training that included participants from Ontario, Quebec, Alberta, California, Florida, and Massachusetts. So quite a nice range of people from different places. And then OIPC also coordinated the update of 2 resources on invasive Phragmites. So we have our BMP document that was updated. The main sections were relevant legislation, aquatic herbicides, so updates on habitat, aqua, and biological control. And we also updated the technical bulletin to coincide with the BMP. And so looking into 2024 to 2025, we're currently updating and publishing and planning to publish an aquatic plant best management practices guide. So this includes an overview of 22 aquatic invasive species. We're excited about this. There was a draft of this guide that was written about 10 years ago, and we're going to have it published on our website soon, which we're looking forward to. And we're also going to work on a communication campaign with invasive Phragmites together in collaboration with our partners. So in 2024, we continued to do workshops and education programs based on our library of best management practices. Our webinar series began with an introduction to the Grow Me Instead program, which was our most popular webinar to date, which had over 500 people register and 200 attendees. Our workshops are aimed at a basic introductory level for gardeners and homeowners, and we also continue to do more in-depth educational programs for municipalities and conservation authorities. We'll continue to develop new workshops for this coming year and customize training programs for municipalities. And then we also introduced the first Fraggers Forum last year. So this was a virtual forum that allowed participants to learn from and engage with fellow scientists, managers, and enthusiasts on the topic of Phragmites management. The forum featured 4 individuals who started frag management groups within their own community, so it was really grassroots, and they provided their perspectives, how they got started, what their challenges were, and it was really a great opportunity to discuss topics around Phragmites management in a really informal, casual setting. So this forum was a great success, and we're hoping to do it again this year. And then last year's virtual conference and OPWG annual meeting were also a success. We had over 150 attendees with the theme Finding a Balance. And lastly, our committees, we have continue to have 2 active committees, the Horticultural Outreach Collaborative, that's co-chaired by Colin Casson and myself, and the Ontario Phragmites Working Group, which is led by co-chairs Janice Gilbert and Gabby Nichols. So you'll see them at the next annual meeting next week on Thursday, January 23rd. We'd also like to thank our co-chairs for their ongoing dedication and commitment, and are always interested in funding opportunities to support projects within both of these OIPC committees. And another unofficial committee is the working group for our BMPs and technical guides. This is a collaborative network of professionals who volunteer their time to ensure that the most accurate information is available in the documents for everyone in the province to use. So we're very thankful for their invaluable support and guidance throughout these documents. And with that, I'll take it back to Brandon.
Thanks, Vicki. It's an amazing amount of work accomplished for sure in 2024. Yeah, I just want to go over some of the services and skills that OIPC offers and has offered. You know, we expanded these over the years, but consulting services and expertise. Vicki and Emily are fantastic at providing this service and the expertise, as well as a big piece of that is networking with industry experts across the province, and that's a huge piece that you know, sort of bring people together and sort of the best minds on how to tackle invasive plant species. Technical research and report writing is another huge piece that Emily and Vicki do with, and you'll see that evidence of that in the BMPs and the technical guides, technical documents that are written, that are on the website. The BMPs, you know, generally for specific industry sectors, and a lot of times the BMPs are written and these technical guides are written in conjunction with industry experts as well. So pull folks together who are practitioners and on the ground, have done a lot of the work to manage invasive species, and bring them together, you know, pull the ideas together, as well as doing that research. And then you see the work that goes into it when you see that polished BMP on the website. So municipal invasive plant management strategy. So I know we've done some work with City of Toronto and other municipalities to provide that, you know, build that plant management strategy for municipalities. So that's a huge piece of what we do. And the training aspect of it, a lot of those webinars and training seminars and workshops that Emily and Vicki put on are hugely popular and provide staff at municipalities and conservation authorities and other agencies with that training and guidance on how to manage invasive species, and then also link those folks up with the BMPs and those technical documents if people aren't familiar with those. Presentations and workshops, kind of what we're doing here today, AGM, Ontario Phragmites Working Group workshop next week as well. And just again, it's that networking and communication piece that Emily and Vicki are so good at as well. Just another piece that they're good at, and providing to the public, and organizational support. And that piece there is, you know, offering that support, linking organizations up with these technical guys, the BMPs, and linking industry experts up with other industry experts across the whole sort of variety of sectors. So OIPC's services and skills are very broad in that respect, but a lot of it comes down to communication, bringing people together, gathering information, and packaging it all in these documents and guidelines, presentations, workshops, training seminars, that type of thing. So it's just an amazing effort by Emily and Vicki. Thank you. So OIPC's future, again, we're going to continue with those training and workshops, build on that education piece about invasive plant species, as well as the BMPs, with funding from ECCC as well as from the City of Toronto and others. That really helps to provide, they give us the opportunity to develop those BMPs. A lot of times it's driven by organizations, municipalities that would like some information and like to have a package on a certain species or a certain set of species. So that's what drives those BMPs. The technical expertise, Emily and Vicki provide a wide range of technical expertise on species, as well as able to link a lot of industry experts as well and bring folks together in that networking opportunity. And then lastly, but certainly not least, is the relatively new partnership with the Canadian Council of Invasive Species, CCIS. And that allows us to have access to national programs and opportunities. So that just broadens the scope of what OIPC can offer, and brings that national lens and national focus to Ontario as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Brandon. And with that, we can move on to our next speaker. It will be Cheryl Post from the City of Toronto, who will talk about Toronto's prescribed goat grazing pilot project. So with that, I'll stop sharing and welcome Cheryl. Hi.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
All right.
You can just share your presentation and
got that going. Let's see here. All right.
So I'll just begin with a brief introduction. So Cheryl Post is a natural environment specialist with the City of Toronto Urban Forestry. For over a decade, she has specialized in natural environment infrastructure projects that protect and enhance Toronto's urban ecology, such as wetlands, boardwalks, and sustainable trails. She recently spearheaded Toronto's innovative prescribed grazing project. The city is the first to pilot this type of grazing for urban ecosystem management in Ontario. Thank you, Cheryl.
Thanks, everybody. Well, hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Cheryl Post, as we said, Natural Environment Specialist with the City of Toronto Urban Forestry, and I'm the lead project manager for Toronto's Prescribed Grazing Project, which I'll be speaking about here today. This is quite a short presentation slot, so I'll just be attempting to kind of hit the highlights, so to speak. But I'll be in the City of Toronto's virtual booth during the 11:20 to 11:50 lunch break, if anyone would like to drop in to chat in more detail. And I've also got our website and my email up at the end as well. So before I go into my project specifically, I'll briefly discuss what prescribed grazing is and why it can be a useful tool. So prescribed grazing is the use of various different types of livestock, like goats or sheep, to achieve specific land management goals. The overarching idea is to mimic the evolutionary adaptation of large grazing herds in ecosystems suited to grazing, such as meadow or prairie habitat. Prescribed grazing has a lot of potential management benefits and shown to be fairly beneficial in a number of ways, like helping to control invasive, non-native, or incompatible plant species, reducing or eliminating woody vegetation encroachment, improving native species regeneration diversity over time, and improving soil characteristics and nutrients. There are some other management goals as well, such as fire hazard reduction, or even reducing encroachment of plants in solar farms, depending on what type of species you use. But as we all know, in an urban context, under pressure, maintaining habitats and species diversity is really important. And it generally requires ongoing and intensive management and interventions to do so. So native meadow habitats, for example, are often relatively rare in urban areas. Since they're subsuccessional and at high risk of woody and invasive species encroachment, if we want to retain them, they generally need ongoing management with integrative techniques like burning, chemical, I've gone, sorry, like burning chemical, mechanical, manual control. These different integrative techniques are all used in ongoing management of these types of ecosystems. So prescribed grazing can be a really exciting new integrative management tool in that toolbox and can fit really well inside an integrative management plan. With even some potential comparative or additive benefits versus, say, only mowing or only chemical control. So like reduced carbon emissions, the potential reduction in chemical herbicide requirements over time, and soil improvements are things sort of very specific to grazing. As well, there is the very important and value-added potential of public engagement and education, and the opportunity to promote the efforts and work of land managers is a really very exciting opportunity within grazing. So having the leading edge as a theme for this year's OIPC conference is really apt here as I get into the City of Toronto's prescribed grazing pilot project. This past June 2024, City of Toronto Forestry brought 65 goats to graze 3,000 meters squared of meadow at Don Valley Brickworks Park. It's one of Toronto's flagship natural environment parks. As the first municipality to pilot urban prescribed grazing in Ontario, we really hope that the project demonstrates Toronto's commitment to the protection and enhancement of our urban ecosystems, as well as just innovation in our management practices. Our pilot goals centered on addressing woody and invasive species encroachment, native species regeneration and diversity, and finding new ways to manage a site where unique public pressures and use patterns with heavy use limit our management options. Also, the truly valuable opportunity for engagement and education was really at the forefront of project planning, along with a strong commitment to animal welfare and public safety. I'll put some before, during, and after drone footage of the site up while I hit on some of our logistics and outcomes. So grazing took place over 2.5 days using a goat grazing company called Goats in the City. The grazing area was enclosed in a double layer fence setup that protected both the goats and the public. So the 3,000 meters squared that we have set aside for grazing is about 1/2 of the total core meadow area in the park. You can see how it's divided there. The grazing area itself then was divided in half, with the goats grazing 1/2 each day. This method helps keep the goats more focused on feeding and less on exploring an overly large area. Overall, as you can see just how effective the herd was at grazing down the entire area delineated for them, with both herbaceous and woody species being targeted. Choosing to graze half the site during the pilot allowed us an ungrazed control area for comparison in our first year of monitoring. And it's really worth noting here that we worked very closely with the Toronto field naturalists on a great volunteer monitoring protocol, and also set up a number of photo monitoring plots that will help us gather great data in the years to come. I do want to stress at this early stage that there are both sort of immediate and longer term timelines for observing outcomes. So while we were immediately able to see favorable impacts to things like woody encroachment and the very positive metrics in outreach and education, the timeline will take longer to observe native and invasive species regeneration, of course, but we are seeing favorable results already. One striking observation, though, was just how effective the goats were at targeting buckthorn. So goats will eat in their order of preference, and buckthorn was definitely their #1 target. You can see in this video on the right that even after they ate the leaves and twigs, they would move on to eat and rub the bark, effectively girdling any buckthorn left standing. We were also able to preserve the native common milkweed plants that were on the site, which is really low on the goats eating preference list and should help with future generation. We were able to move the goats off of that area of pasture before those plants were impacted. And I did want to briefly pull out those outreach and education metrics, which were really overwhelmingly positive. In addition to post-event opportunities for education and outreach, sort of like this one, we had a lot of engagement opportunities during the event itself. So over 1,300 park visitors took part in staff-led talks, while others could learn more informally from education signs installed around the site or online from the website and social media posts. Myself and our eco shepherd from Goats in the City, Ian Matthews, were on site the whole time to have more informal conversations with everyone. Tons and tons of interest. In terms of media, the project was able to generate 143 media mentions from both local and national media outlets and close to 140 million online impressions, with both of those metrics continuing to grow since the event. But what was really great was that 100% of those mentions were considered positive sentiment, including public interaction in the field, which I think anyone involved with municipal land management activities can really appreciate. 100% positivity. So lastly, what are our next steps? Following our pilot success in 2025, we're aiming to move to a rotational grazing model, shifting to the other ungrazed half part of the meadow. We're also continuing our monitoring protocols with Toronto field naturalists, and we expect the final reports from the 2024 pilot from them quite soon. Overall, as I get ready to bring the goats back in 25, I'll be really continuing to spread the word about this project. I hope it helps communicate the City of Toronto's dedication to innovation and working at the forefront of natural environment management, and maybe even inspire some other land managers to look into grazing as an option. So if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to take them during the break at our booth. The website and my email is here as well. Thanks so much, and to the OIPC for having me.
Thank you, Cheryl. It was very interesting. I just love to hear about the goat project and how that's could be successful. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's an exciting one.
Yeah, neat. Thank you.
Thanks.
And with that, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker. So Dr. Joseph Bennett, I'll invite him to the stage. There he is. Hi, Joe. How are you doing?
I'm okay. How are you?
Great. Great. So I'm going to introduce you as put your slides up. So he will be our keynote speaker, and the title of his talk is Staying Ahead of the Curve on Invasive Species Detections and Control. Dr. Joseph Bennett is an associate professor at the Institute of Environmental and Interdisciplinary Sciences and Department of Biology at Carleton University. He's also co-director of the Geomatics and Landscape Ecology Laboratory. Research in his lab focuses on prioritizing conservation decisions, invasion ecology, optimal monitoring, biogeography, and spatial statistics. He has a particular interest in applied research that helps protect threatened species, control invasive species, and create better environmental policies at the national level. He also designs optimization tools to help resource managers better achieve their conservation goals. His research is being used by numerous governments and non-government agencies in Canada and elsewhere to help set their conservation priorities. Thank you, Joe, for being here.
Thank you very much. Can you see my screen okay?
Yeah, I can see it fine.
Awesome. Okay, ready to go? Okay, well, thank you very much for this opportunity. It's really humbling to be able to speak to such an interesting group, and I really, really appreciate this opportunity. I must apologize in advance. I've been sick with the flu for the last week, and I'm hoping my voice will last the next 45 minutes to an hour. If it doesn't, I apologize. And if it's a little less polished than what one would normally expect, I apologize for that as well. Um, with that being said, I'm going to talk about staying ahead of the curve on invasive species detections and control. And I like to start my talks with a thanks to lab mates, collaborators, and funders. And I've been really, really fortunate to work with a great crew of people. There's some amazing people who work in our field, and I've been really lucky to work with some awesome people in our lab group. And I appreciate the funding of several agencies. The primary ones are up here, but there's been other agencies who have funded our work, and I very much appreciate that. I also wanted to highlight the work of one person in particular who was in our lab group, but is now at the University of Melbourne. A lot of what I'm going to talk about today is really stuff that was led by her. And the QR code on the bottom right is a code to her lab group, and you should really check out what she does. Although she's in Australia now in a permanent academic position, she does work with Canadian issues and with Canadians still. So she's an awesome collaborator. And if you want to check out our lab group, then the QR code in the top left will take you there. So the issue of invasive species is really personal for me. I grew up on a farm in southeastern Ontario, and it just turns out that that area is a real hotspot of ash, and white ash in particular. The fence row behind me in this picture was mostly ash, and it also had a lot of elm as well. And we had some butternut on the farm. As you can imagine, as time went on, there were massive changes in our farm. Most recently with emerald ash borer, but also with the latest wave of Dutch elm disease, and of course with butternut canker as well. And so we could see all of these things happening, and it felt like there wasn't much we could do to control them. And it was a very powerless sort of feeling for a place that we all loved very much. In a broader sense, here's at least my perspective on the issue with invasive species in Canada. As many of you know, they're listed as a #1 or #2 threat to biodiversity in Canada and also globally. So this is a really big deal. It's a very big threat. And invasive species have also been implicated in over half of extinctions. So that's a lot of extinctions. In particular, in Canada, invasive species have been devastating to many aquatic species. And I think that Canada could probably do a bit of a better job in investing in invasive species prevention and control. There are some amazing people doing really, really awesome work. And this may be just my perspective, but I feel like with some of the excellent initiatives around biodiversity conservation, including 30 by 30, there's been some great work. And I feel like invasive species maybe haven't gotten quite the attention they've deserved. Now, again, that might just be my perspective. But that's kind of what I've felt over the last several years. But there's also social and geographic complexity that makes effective management difficult. So it's really, really hard in Canada to undertake land management. There's a lot of political complexity. There's a lot of jurisdictional differences among and within the country. We have federal governments, we have indigenous nations and communities governments, we have provincial governments, different levels of authority, municipal governments, a very vibrant NGO and business sector. And it makes things complicated, that's for sure. So I think that's something that's really important to acknowledge. So many of you, I think, have seen this curve here, this invasion curve. And this originated in the state of Victoria for weed management of grain. So some of the numbers here, I think, need to be taken with a slight grain of salt. But nonetheless, I think that the message of this curve is really important. We see the black curve kind of in the middle of this graph, and that's the area occupied by an invasive species. So this is a sort of lag period where you can prevent the invasion, or you can detect it early, or you can rapidly respond to kind of keep things at bay, and then it'll take off. And then at that point, it's about managing established and spreading invaders. And on the bottom of this graph, there is the economic returns, which for the state of Victoria at that point, they estimated to be 1 to 100 for prevention, 1 to 25 for early detection, and then kind of so on down until they're not nearly as good once it gets to the kind of the spread. And so what we want to do, of course, is to stay right at the bottom of that curve as much as possible. That's the real challenge that I think it's really, really important to acknowledge and important to work towards, is staying kind of in that zone of the curve. And that's where a lot of the complications lie. And I think some possible solutions that I'm going to talk about today to kind of keep us in that area of the curve. And I've deliberately put a question mark on this slide because I want to say that this is the perspective of one person, and based on my research and talking with people. But I'm not I'm not going to say I have the solutions at all. I think that these are talking points and discussion points, and I'd like to be part of discussions, and I feel happy to do that. But I'm not pretending that I have the solution. So I'm going to put these out there with a really kind of a humble attitude that I hope that they have some good information, but I know that I'm not, going to solve it all. That's for sure. Okay, so with that caveat, I think we need a more holistic approach. In particular, for partnerships and communication, I think there's some amazing work being done, but we can strengthen some of that maybe. I think we need some policy changes as well, and maybe some legislative changes also. And we also need to make better use of science to tackle the problem of invasive species. And that includes optimally allocating resources and more efficient monitoring. Now, there's a lot of people doing just this stuff, and it's including lots of people here at this conference. So I feel like in some ways I'm talking to people who are already doing these things. But nonetheless, I think it's nice to kind of put them in one sort of presentation, and also feel good about what we're doing as researchers to kind of help along this path. So in terms of a more holistic approach, there is a lot of great precedent and really good organizations. It's so impressive what people are doing for invasive species. I've been involved in quite a lot of threatened species conservation initiatives, and I know how much work these tasks are. And for invasive species, like some of the groups who are working in Ontario and Canada, in particular NGOs, but also government agencies, are working really hard doing awesome work. So I think we have, in a lot of ways, a strong basis. But there's also some not so great precedent, especially regarding Indigenous peoples and communication and partnership. And, this isn't news, obviously, but I think it's something that we need to acknowledge if we're going to kind of find a better way forward together. In particular, some Indigenous colleagues have talked about, to me, of situations where people were coming in and managing invasive species on their territories without any consultation whatsoever. And in some cases, even doing spraying without consultation. Of course, that can really cause a lot of ill will among people. And so I think partnerships, is something we need to keep working harder and harder on. There's also the issue where a lot of different agencies and governments have a role, and can in some ways be a strength, but in some ways it can lead to sort of situations where it can slow things down a little bit. And in a couple of projects I've been involved in, there's been some question marks about jurisdiction, provincial, federal, etc. And that can kind of slow responses. And I think that that's an important thing to acknowledge. I've also there's the issue of some agencies have kind of internal roles that are variable. I've been told by someone on the inside of Canada Border Services Agency that it's really hard to prioritize efforts when one is looking for smuggling of goods or people and trying to enforce things like that while also looking for invasive species. And even from a training standpoint, it's hard to find time to get all of the training for those things. And I think a big dilemma we all have is how to share information quickly and efficiently so that no matter who we are, we're not being territorial, we can share information. And I'm speaking as an academic, and academics are notoriously territorial. And I'm a huge believer in open data and open information sharing as much as possible. Excuse me. So if we're going to stay on this initial part of the curve, if we're going to prevent invasions, we're going to early detect rapid response, then communication, I think, is really, really key to this. And for that, I think we can take some lessons from other places. Australia and New Zealand have single primary biosecurity agencies and strong publication education on invasive species. Anyone who's ever flown in to New Zealand or Australia will instantly know that they take biosecurity way more seriously than we do. It's just a completely different situation. They've obviously struggled mightily with invasive species. And so I think they've established these agencies and protocols that in some ways I think we can look to help prevent invasions at the border. New Zealand has a better legislative framework for Indigenous partnerships. I'm not the person to say how Indigenous partnerships need to be managed or how the Canadian legislation or constitution need to be reformed. But I think listening to Indigenous peoples on improving this relationship is a good start. USA has an interagency body that helps to coordinate biosecurity. And so I think that there's some lessons from other places. So with that being said, I have three bold proposals. I realize they're bold, and I know that there can be some difficulties with them. First is a dedicated federal biosecurity agency for border biosecurity and to facilitate communication and rapid responses. And I've used the word facilitate deliberately because I'm leery about suggesting another layer of bureaucracy. But if there's an ability to centrally facilitate communication and rapid responses, so for example, to communicate that border services are starting to find a lot of species X, and communicate with invasive species NGOs, provincial governments, and Indigenous nations, that's the case, then we can kind of get ready and we can facilitate rapid responses. We could even have something like the military disaster response team, the DART team, that could help facilitate rapid responses to an emerging invasion. And there's good precedent for Canada doing well, preventing a couple of invasions, particularly of Asian longhorn beetle the last time it came through. So I think we can do this. I think there should be dedicated staff in the agency to help listen to and partner with Indigenous nations and communities. And again, I can't say much beyond that because being not an Indigenous person, I think that it's important to work with Indigenous peoples on how exactly this would work out. I have also had suggested by Indigenous colleagues that having dedicated liaisons for a variety of issues, but as a single kind of point of contact might be a good idea to explore. And that has apparently worked quite well in protected areas management. because a lot of Indigenous nations and communities are kind of overwhelmed with piecemeal government approaches to things. Again, none of this is news, but I think it's at least something we need to pay close attention to. And we also need better data sharing, including border inspection data. And that data sharing should be from everybody to the extent possible. I know some data are sensitive, but if territoriality and not kind of like feeling like you have the time is the reason, then I don't think those are good excuses. And that includes people like me too. So academics, like I said, are not fantastic at sharing data. We're getting better, but I think everybody needs to be able to share data. And there are some good platforms, citizen science platforms. And I know on iNaturalist, there's a couple of different sort of platforms for sharing invasive species data. I think we need more of this, and I think we need the ability to share it rapidly. So for the next part, I want to talk about better use of science. So I'm primarily a scientist and I do scientific research. So I find the science around invasive species really, really fascinating, intimidating, but really, really fascinating. And the reason is there's a bunch of scientific challenges around invasive species. First of all, invasive species are often hard to detect. So you can imagine crossing the border and there's a bunch of cars kind of crossing the border. Imagine the person at Border Services Agency, whether it's a US or Canadian agency, trying to figure out how to detect an invasive species, or trying to detect something like a seed on someone's boot, or maybe something caught in a wheel well. That's a really, really hard thing to do, especially when there are a bunch of other things that they're also concerned about. So invasive species are often hard to detect. If they're coming through as a seed, that is an issue. Invasion lags are hard to predict as well. So I'm not going to go through all of these graphs, but I'm putting them up there to demonstrate a general pattern. And you can focus on the blue lines. So what we have here is a proportion of an area occupied on the y-axis of every graph, and the time steps on the x-axis. And this is a paper that some friends of mine and I did a few years ago. And we took just very, very generic individual propagules in a simulated landscape, and we varied their life history parameters a little bit, and we varied the environment a little bit, and we varied where they would establish themselves a bit. And that's why these 6 graphs. But everything we did suggested actually a pretty wide variation in our simulated individuals kind of expanding into different populations. And sometimes they took off rapidly, but in a lot of cases, there would be lags. And these lags were for individuals with exactly the same life history parameters as ones that took off quickly. It was just the stochasticity of the environment, and whether by random chance, like life or death, happened at certain stages. And that is really humbling, because it means essentially that invasion lags can be really hard to predict. And, excuse me, and it's hard to kind of predict which species might be invasive if we're kind of looking at them on the landscape. Management can also be very, very expensive. And I think that's a difficult thing to acknowledge as well. Excuse me 1 second. Okay. So management can be really expensive. I work with big data sets in a bunch of jurisdictions. And in a lot of cases, like the ongoing management of invasive species are involve huge budgets. So that can make things very difficult. So one thing we've been doing in our lab is designing tools to help us out in these scientific challenges. We've been designing optimization tools to better allocate management resources and also optimal monitoring tools. So I'm going to talk about the optimization tools first for resource allocation. So why use systematic planning tools? I do get asked this question a fair bit because there are some really good experts who can use really good kind of like knowledge, rules of thumb, et cetera, to do a good job managing. So the question about whether to use systematic tools is a legitimate one for sure. My response is usually that conservation problems are actually really, really complex. And once we get into big areas, like we have Ontario in the right side of the slide here, then those issues become kind of overwhelming for people to deal with. If there's lots and lots of different options in different areas and lots of different jurisdictional background, as you can imagine in Ontario, there's areas of federal jurisdiction, there's areas of Indigenous nations and government jurisdictions, there's areas of provincial government jurisdiction, there's areas of municipal jurisdiction, there's private land, there's so-called crown land. There's a biodiversity gradient, which is the kind of color background on this map. And there's a bunch of existing protected areas. So if we're looking at sort of protecting and managing biodiversity in Ontario, it's really hard for one person to kind of figure things out if you've got a big, big project and you're trying to allocate a bunch of your limited resources. And systematic tools can also help us be transparent and accountable rather than to simply say, well, this is kind of my opinion, this is how it should be, which I think in some cases is important to acknowledge, but we need to be humble about that as well. So systematic tools can give us baselines against which to compare proposed alternatives, and they can facilitate negotiation and win-wins. And a lot of studies have suggested that they can do a fair bit better than even sort of standard rules of thumb that people often use for conservation. And here's a study that Dr. Emma Hudgens led, and it's around emerald ash borer control and management in North America. And on our y-axis, we have the exposed ash street trees. And on the x-axis, we have the biological control proportion. And so management in the US has kind of tended toward biological control over the last few years and sort of abandoned quarantines, where it turns out that when accounting for the spread and dispersal of emerald ash borer and accounting for its life history and accounting for costs as well and long-term management and where it will likely go, it turns out that we can do quite a lot better in an optimal approach than in a kind of a standard biological control approach. The color gradient is our assumptions about the efficiency of both biological control and quarantines. And across the whole range of efficiency assumptions, which are reasonable ranges, the little diamonds on the bottom left of the graph meant that the exposed ash trees are much, much lower. So the optimization approach in that bottom left of the graph is really always the way to go. It involves some biological control, but not always. You need the flexibility and you need to be able to optimize where it is. And this study showed that somewhere around $600 million could be saved by an optimal approach. And so I think it's important to give them a place, not as decision-making tools, but as decision facilitation tools to help with facilitating decisions and seeing at least how theoretically we might be able to do with our limited budgets. So previous options have included intuition, gap analysis, simple ranking of alternatives. And I think those are like really important to use still. They definitely have a place. And then prioritization software has been around for well over 20 years now. And it tended to use kind of simple algorithms that took a long time to run, which is okay, but you could never be sure you're getting the optimal answer for what you kind of put in. And so what we've done in our tool design is create a tried to create user-friendly interface. We've designed tools that can find an optimal solution. Now that's in quotations because it's only optimal for what data are fed into it. And so there's nobody in conservation, nobody often has a optimal solution because there are various different opinions about what, should be done and what goals are. And so these can find optimal for what's put into them, which can be useful for helping people kind of compare what one person wants versus another person wants and find win-wins. We also wanted them to be open source, have a fast running time so that in a meeting, person A could be running them and say, I want to make sure I minimize Phragmites in my park. And person B could be saying, I want to make sure I maximize wetland bird habitat in my park. And then they can compare their two solutions to show where their win-wins lie right during a meeting because these tools run fast. We also wanted them to be flexible for both land and water protection and stewardship. Our tools were designed in collaboration with the Nature Conservancy of Canada and Carleton University. The lead designer was Dr. Jeff Hansen at Carleton University. And the coordinators were Dr. Richard Schuster and me, and we had an awesome team of people at both agencies. And it was funded by RBC and ECCC. So there's two tools we have designed. There's one called Where to Work, which is for binary decisions, manage versus not. So if you can imagine you have a decision about where to manage for, say, Phragmites or emerald ash borer or something like that. This will help with those binary decisions. And then there's what to do, which is for more complex stewardship decisions, where the decision is not just manage versus not, but how to manage and various management options. And the tools are freely available at ncc.carleton.ca. So here's what Where to Work looks like. We wanted it to look a lot like Google Maps or standard, GIS software. And we have on the left panel, we have our various different goals we have. In this case, the example is a biodiversity protection goal, and we can highlight those on a map. We can click on them on a map. And then on the right-hand side, we can have how much of those we want, what objectives we want to set. And then we can run the tool in various different ways to look at what varying our goals might do for our budget or for where we manage, and to look at what the role of uncertainty is by examining ranges of things very quickly. So these tools are being used by the Nature Conservancy of Canada right now, and by Indigenous partners, and also by ECCC. So some benefits of Where to Work is that it's scalable. It can work from the property to global scale, and it is scientific. It uses the best available data and methods. So the methods that we use are kind of the cutting edge of what is available to optimize solutions, and it can explore many options. So we can look at uncertainty, because uncertainty is really, really big in invasive species management and biodiversity conservation. So we can run ranges of different assumptions to see if that would change our solution or not. The next tool, which is the one that is for more complex decisions, such as spray an invasive for an invasive species versus pull the invasive species versus public education versus combinations of those things, is called What to Do. It's most appropriate, I think, for kind of smaller scale things where you say I have maybe 30, 40 sites, something like that, and you've got an overwhelming decision about where and when do you allocate your resources, your limited budgets. And it's really works well for that because all of the assumptions are documented. They can all be, things can be saved and rerun, and you can explore ranges of potential solutions, and you can explore ranges of budgets so that maybe if your budget increases next year, you can figure out where it's best to manage in a complementary way for what you did this year. So some benefits of what to do are that it can evaluate a range of actions. It's can quantify the costs and benefits of actions. So these have to come from the user. So whatever the cost of, say, a helicopter spraying for Phragmites or something like that comes from the user, and then those can be added up and allocated optimally. And it's a nice structured way of thinking about management actions. And it's complementary for other software that people have used, such as Marathi is a common biodiversity conservation software. As I said, that these are decision facilitation tools. I always like to emphasize that because we never want to take the agency out of people's hands. And so when we use machine learning, which is what's underneath these tools, when we use it in our everyday lives to say, find a flight on Expedia or find music on Spotify, we have the agency. We click on the flight, we click on the music, and we should never give that up. It's humans making the decision. And so I always want to emphasize that these are really great for helping with decisions, but they don't magically provide the answer, that's for sure. Some other tools that we've been working on to help us out are optimal monitoring tools. Monitoring is a really, really big part of invasive species management, obviously, and biodiversity conservation in general. It can help us to characterize problems, to find if something is coming in and being invaded for initial detections, and for tracking progress as well for adaptive management to refine our approaches as time goes on. And it can also lead to surprise discoveries too. So monitoring is a really, really important thing. Of course, in invasive species management, a lot of the surprise discoveries are not happy discoveries, but it's really, really important to have them. But there's also a dilemma around monitoring too, because no species or place has ever been protected by monitoring alone. And in fact, there are a lot of examples of inefficient monitoring happening. And in a lot of cases, monitoring can divert money away and time away from direct action. So for monitoring, we want to do it well, and we want to do it in a way that is going to help us manage better. And the ways that we are helping with that is developing optimal monitoring tools and better accounting for detectability in monitoring. For developing optimal monitoring tools, one thing we've been working on a lot is value of information analysis. This is a technique that originated in economics and explores the influence of new information on decisions. It uses Bayes' theorem, a mathematical technique, to look at, first of all, what is our best estimate of how well we might do with current information we have. So if we have kind of like some information about where the invasive species are, if we deploy our management team, how well do we think we're going to do for that? Now, obviously, there's big uncertainty on that, but that's okay. We can model ranges of that. Then we can compare that to a theoretical, and it's almost always theoretical in our field, perfect information. So if you imagine somebody waved a magic wand and we knew exactly where all the occurrences of an invasive species were, and then we use our budget to manage them as best possible. How might we do then? We can model that theoretical value, and then we can compare that to how might we do if we spend some money and go out to some places and monitor. That's different from perfect information because monitoring almost never gives us perfect information, and our ability to monitor could be limited in some cases, but we can look at what that might be. We can mathematically try to project what that might be, and that can give us a good idea of where, when, and even how to monitor. And it originated in economics, so we've been expanding it for conservation, for biodiversity. And because in biodiversity conservation, we have a lot of multi-unit problems. So what sites do we monitor? What, like, of various location options, what do we monitor? The sequential problems too, like how long and how often do we monitor? We've also been relating management costs and monitoring costs to objectives that are not money, because in economics, where the theory began, a lot of things are kind of like have a baseline objective of money, either making or saving money, which, while it's important in our field, is really not our like baseline objective. We want to conserve biodiversity. We want to prevent species invasion. So we've been adjusting the math so that it's more appropriate for our field. We've also been using it to predict the benefits of monitoring for both model improvement and immediate decisions. And this is ongoing research that I don't have the results for yet, because it is really, really gnarly math that I love, but I also find very, very intimidating. But it's interesting because monitoring can both help us with immediate decisions. So maybe we find a location of an invasive species and then we manage for it. But every time we monitor, we also learn a little bit more about just generally the species or generally the ecosystem. And so we're looking at what are the dual benefits of monitoring. And because the math is gnarly, we're designing tools that use the principles behind this analysis, but in a qualitative way that makes it really like easy for managers who are obviously like really smart and really awesome at what they do, but often like way too busy to learn like a complex technique when they're extremely busy managing and doing things on the ground. And my background is in management before academia. I worked in 10 years as a practitioner. And so I know how busy managers are. And so what we want to do is make things easy rather than academic. Another thing we've been doing is better accounting for detectability, which I find absolutely fascinating because it's like a detective game. And detectability can range from near zero to near 100%, depending on the species and the situation we're dealing with. You can imagine like there's this picture on the right of all this dunnage coming in at the US border. Like if something is coming in on that wood, the detectability of that is not going to be 100%. And in fact, both false negatives and false positives are the norm when we're looking for things. False negatives in particular are probably more common, and they have pretty broad implications as well. Excuse me. So this is a problem because we could be not managing the right places. We could be missing occurrences, and we could miss the leading edge, for example, of an invasion. Or we could be classifying something as eradicated when it's not because we're missing occurrences. Or we could even be classifying something as expanding when it's not. And this is a little counterintuitive, but if you can imagine, as we're monitoring for an invasive species, if we start to learn about how to better monitor for it and our field teams are getting better, we're just getting better at finding it, it may look like it's expanding, but we are actually maybe just finding more of it because we're getting good at it. And just in general, it can mean not prioritizing resources properly. And so as an example here, imagine we have an invasive green moth and a native blue butterfly. If the green moth is hard to detect in the forest environment, maybe because of the light or something like that, or it blends in with the tree leaves, then we may think that it doesn't occur there. We may miss the occurrences there. And we may misunderstand how that moth is spread through the environment among all of our kind of 4 sites on this landscape. And think that like the place to manage is probably the grassland on the top left. We also may misunderstand the competitive dynamics between the invasive moth and the native butterfly as well.
Just
So
5 minutes.
yeah, got it. Thanks. So so this means it's very important to account for detectability. So what do we do about it? Do not ignore the problem. I think that that's really, really important. Biologists have kind of like papered over detectability, apart from like a lot of people working on birds think about detectability a lot, but the rest of us need to as well. And that means we also need to survey enough or acknowledge or account for uncertainty. So a way of doing that, maybe in invasive species detection, is either up our survey level. I mean, that's easy for me to ask for that. And I realize that can be hard to do. Or deploy a clever combination of surveying at the border as best we can, but incentivizing, say, citizen scientists close to the border to be like sentinels to look out for those occurrences that we may have missed because we know detectability is imperfect at the border. We should also explore new options for estimating detection rates so we can figure out how good we are at detecting invasive species. And there's a bunch of ways we can do that. We can look at detection effort. That's a really easy way of doing things. How long, how many people have looked for something? How long does it take till we first find it? That all of that information can help. And ideally, we should explicitly incorporate detection, imperfect detection into decisions. So to bring it all together, I really admire New Zealand in their biosecurity team of 4.7 million. They've got strong public education. When I was there were TV ads about invasive species. And I'm wondering, can we have a biosecurity team of 41 million? And I think two keys will be more equitable and accessible approaches in a combination of citizen/community science with optimal resource allocation. So for our biosecurity team of 41 million, I think the more equitable approaches will be important. Enforcement obviously has a place. It's very important. But I also think people need to feel they're part of the team and not the enemy. And there have been a few cases where there maybe needed to be more education about things and maybe less targeting of people, but some education maybe before enforcement. I also think we need to be open to alternative voices, in particular Indigenous voices, about how we can tackle this problem together. We also need to work with citizen and community science. And I noticed some people are talking at the conference today about this, and it's really exciting. And more people are working on it. And I think we are just at the beginning of citizen and community science. It's got its limitations, but combined with optimal resource allocation and cleverly allocating professional resources to complement so that the two can work together, I think will really help with invasive species monitoring and directing action. So we can use the best science to help with detection and incentivize monitoring where it's most needed. We can also keep an eye out for new techniques. And again, like there are people working on eDNA, remote sensing, some people speaking today on these topics, and look at how they might be broadly deployed and even maybe deployed among people who are not experts in consultation with experts and with experts helping with analyses. And we can allocate professional resources to complement information from the public. And I think that all these things will help our biosecurity team of 41 million. So as a final message, I hope that I've conveyed that there's something we can all do to help with managing invasive species in Canada. And again, I really admire what a lot of people are doing, like here at this conference. It feels weird to make recommendations that they're like people here are already doing. But I really appreciate that people are doing that. And I'd like to thank you for listening and apologize for my croaky voice and coughing. But thank you again for the opportunity. I really appreciate this.
No, thank you, Joe. That was a really great overview for the focus of our presentation and our conference today. And especially I like that kind of personal element you added at the beginning of how like your own life experience influenced your research. So that's really great. Yeah. We do have some time for questions. It's 11:06. So if you have any, please put them in the Q&A. I think there's one so far for you. They're asking how some of the practices can be done on a homeowner-based property basis. I think some of the monitoring we were showing earlier, can that be done on a homeowner level?
Oh yeah, that's an awesome question, and I'm so glad somebody asked that. Well, two things. One is to have a lookout for what people are looking for, and become educated for what people are looking for. So know what to kind of find to be looking for, and then also engage with citizen slash community science platforms such as iNaturalist, because if you find something and it never gets reported, then it's almost as if you didn't find it. And it's getting easier and easier and easier to report things. And there's also people who can help with identifying something, because if it's something like a little plant or a beetle or something like that, I mean, I've been working on this for years and years and years, and taxonomy is intimidating. I find it very intimidating sometimes. So there are people on platforms and people in the NGOs, some of whom are represented today, who can help. Also people in government agencies. Right here in Ottawa, there's Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. I know some of my colleagues will help people identify potential invasive species.
Yeah, that's great. Are there any other questions? What about, if you could maybe speak to this, plans to impose restrictions on the sale and trafficking of invasive plant species? If there's any plans for that, and strengthening biosecurity, I guess, in general.
Yeah, I think this is where a single federal agency around the border would help. But within Canada, there's many, many jurisdictional issues. There's inter-municipal, there's inter-indigenous nations and territories. There is inter-provincial. Ideally, it's easiest done at the border, but the extent to which we can coordinate and have a kind of a Team Canada approach, I think would be very, very helpful. In terms of like what plants, where and when, that's I think where the scientists will come in, and I do hope that we can help to make sure we're focusing on the species that are most important.
Would you say New Zealand is one of the most successful sort of biosecurity citizen science ways of like preventing species from coming in? Or are there other countries that have seen a lot of success too with their programs?
Yeah, such a great question, because the answer is kind of yes and kind of no, because they've been devastated by invasive species. Obviously, I mean, it's kind of famous that they've lost a lot of their biodiversity to invasive species. But because of that, they have developed protocols and a New Zealand-wide approach that has probably saved a lot of species. And they have pretty strict rules and pretty strict enforcement. So yes, I would say they deserve a lot of credit for what they've done. Australia also pretty good. I mean, like I said at the beginning, if anyone's flown into Australia, they'll realize it's a very different border experience from here in Canada. And there are a lot. I've seen people get busted for biosecurity issues in Australia in a way that, like, I just don't think Canada Border Services Agency. I've never had a bad interaction with them. They've always, they must be working extremely hard. But it'd be nice if they had more capacity, or we had ideally we had a biosecurity agency, a dedicated agency.
Yeah, definitely. That's great. Great comments. I think that's it. So that'll.
Vicki, there is one more question. Hello, Joe. It's Brandon, president of the board of OIPC. And there is a question here in the Q&A. This person's asking about they haven't seen microbiome considerations in site-specific restoration. So the question is basically how to, or is there a discussion on reintroducing the microbiome that was there before the invasive species entered the site? And then, I mean, it's a quite complex topic, but further asking about the processes that one can use to restore that microbiome.
Oh, that's a great question. Unfortunately, I have to confess that it's outside my realm of expertise. I'm not a microbiologist, but it seems like a really important question to deal with as well. Hopefully, maybe we have experts at the conference, or maybe better placed to answer that one.
That's great. Thanks.
Pleasure.
Great. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the invitation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Vicki, if you could just pull up the slide for the lunch break, please.
Sure. One second. That's- I have to switch it. You see that?
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Vicki. So thank you, everyone. So this is the end of the first session. Again, I want to encourage you to go visit our sponsors. So there is an expo tab at the top of the lobby. Our sponsors will be there during our lunch break as well as during our networking break. So I encourage you to go check them out, talk to the representatives, and learn more about their organizations. So after the lunch break and after our next session, we're going to be doing concurrent sessions that will start at 1 o'clock and the other one's at 2:10. So this little figure here will be put up into the lobby for you guys to review, just so you know kind of which presentations are going to be in those sessions. And once you're in those sessions, you do have the opportunity to switch between them if you want to see the presentation in the other session. So I'll just, the agenda is already posted in the webinar, the Zoom lobby as well. So I encourage you to take a look at that. And yeah, so thank you so much for joining us for this opening session. And our next session will begin at 11:50 after a short lunch break. And once that session is live, again, everyone, you'll see a green join button next to that session. So thanks so much, everybody, and we'll see you in the next session.